Hello and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. Today we're going to be talking about what to expect in Rings of Power Season 2. Welcome back, my name is Ben, I'm the Librarian, and today we're talking about what you can expect in the Rings of Power Season 2 based on the trailers and the behind the scenes material that we've seen so far, and also where we're going to kind of pick up off of from Season 1. Now, of course, there will be some potential spoilers in this. Now, I don't know anything except what's been shown to the public in terms of the trailers and behind the scenes and that kind of thing, but if you don't really want to know where the story arc is going, then you probably don't want to watch the rest of this video. Now, of course, ultimately, we know where the story arc of Rings of Power is going because we know that it's leading into the Lord of the Rings and needs to end with the Battle of the Last Alliance, where the ring is cut off of Sauron's hand and ultimately doesn't get destroyed. So we already kind of know the ending of this story. What we don't know is how they're going to get there because a lot of it was never spelled out by Tolkien.
I do not know the way.
And as they are adapting it, there is some creative liberties that they're taking and obviously some necessary things that they have to kind of modify and change as they get it for film and fill in those gaps that just weren't told to us by J.R.R. Tolkien himself. So with that being said, what are we looking at for Season 2? Well, there's a few major plot lines here that are coming over from Season 1 and that we can see being picked up in the trailers for Season 2. And probably the most important of these is the elf storyline. So the elf storyline focused around Galadriel, Elrond, Celebrimbor, Gil-galad. Those are kind of our main elf characters. And how is that going to feed into Season 2? Well, we left them at the end of Season 1 making the three rings. Galadriel had discovered that Halbrand was Sauron and he had fled to Mordor. And so that's kind of where we're at. Looking at the material that we've seen so far, it looks like Sauron is going to return in his Anatar form. We call this the Anatar storyline. It comes out of Tolkien's writings in the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, and this is where the Rings of Power are going to be forged. So we expect Sauron to return, tell Celebrimbor that he is a messenger from the Valar, and help him to create the remaining rings. Now, they have switched the order of these rings. They have already made the 3 elven rings, and now they're going to make the 7 and the 9. So there are definitely some plot implications from that switch, and we'll have to see how those play out. Ultimately, though, we're building towards discovering that Anatar is not who he says he is, trying to stop him, and then a really big battle when Eregion is sacked and Celebrimbor is ultimately going to die a really gruesome and violent death. The other plot that's going on, of course, is going to be following Galadriel here as far as the elves go. Galadriel, her friendship with Elrond, and her relationship with her Ring of Power, and how that's going to play out. That's definitely been something that has been present in the trailers, and it looks like there's going to be some conflict between her and Elrond there, as well as some kind of quest that involves them fighting Barrow Wights. We really don't know anything about that or how that is going to play out at all, because that's just not a story that Tolkien told, and so we're going to have to just see how that one plays out. Elrond looks like he is definitely going to be on the side of not using Rings of Power, so we're going to see that kind of carry through in his character into the Lord of the Rings, of course. And that's going to cause some conflict between him and his BFF Galadriel. Of course, she's ultimately going to become his mother-in-law, but I don't think that's going to happen in this season since she has no children. So that will be really interesting to see how that plays out in the future. All right, one of our other major storylines from Season 1 was the Dwarf storyline, which overlapped with the elves, of course, because they're working together on this forge. And Elrond and Durin are also BFFs, so it looks like Elrond actually has 2 BFFs going on here. But in this season, it appears that the main kind of thrust of the Dwarven storyline is going to be conflict between King Durin and Prince Durin. So Prince Durin is Elrond's friend, King Durin is his father. Of course, that's not really accurate to the books because there should only be one Durin at a time because it's a reincarnation thing, but they've chosen to show 2 of them together as father and son here. It seems like the conflict that began between them around Mithril at the end of Season 1 is going to kind of really blow up here, and the thrust of that is going to be around the Dwarvish Rings of Power. So King Durin at least is going to receive a Dwarvish Ring of Power, which appears to have some corrupting influence on him. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. It does seem like ultimately they're driving this storyline towards the Balrog coming in. That, of course, canonically shouldn't happen until several thousand years later because it doesn't happen during the Second Age, but it seems like that's where they are moving the story to. But I would not expect to actually see the destruction of Moria during Season 2. That seems like it would be too early for that. Another character that will be introduced in the Dwarf storyline is Narvi, the one who creates the Doors of Durin with Celebrimbor. And so we should expect to see the Doors of Durin again, which we know from The Lord of the Rings actually make an appearance here in the Rings of Power Season 2. Since Celebrimbor is going to die and Narvi's being introduced this season, it seems like this is the only season for us to see that happen, if it's going to happen. And since it's an obvious connection to The Lord of the Rings, I don't know why they wouldn't pick up on that. All right, next we have the Harfoot storylines. Now remember, the Harfoots are proto-hobbits. They are not hobbits, but they are the ancestors of some of the hobbits of the Shire. And so we've had the Nori storyline with the stranger coming from season 1. At the end of season 1, they leave the other Harfoots in order to go to Rune to try and find the constellation that the stranger, who may or may not be Gandalf, is looking for. Just as an aside, I really hope that it's not Gandalf, because it's way too early for Gandalf to be into the story. So ideally it's going to be a blue wizard, but we will see. So for their storyline, what we see is them in Rune in the trailers, and it appears that there is conflict between them and an evil wizard, hopefully another blue wizard and not actually Saruman, since that would be weird. The other weird thing that's happening here is the introduction of Tom Bombadil, who is in Rune for a so far unexplained reason. And there's going to need to be some good explanation around that to explain why Tom Bombadil isn't in the Old Forest where he belongs. But regardless, we expect to see there be some conflict there between the wizards and some self-discovery on the part of the stranger, whoever he is. And of course, continued friendship with Nori there, paralleling Gandalf and Frodo's friendship in The Lord of the Rings. Not a lot of details on that, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. But one thing that we have heard is that another strain of proto-hobbits, the Stors, are going to be introduced. So it'll be interesting to see them depict another halfling culture and what that's going to be like. Tolkien gave very little information about the proto-hobbits at all. In fact, there's really not much out there beyond what he says in Concerning Hobbits, and then a little bit in the history of Gollum and how Gollum got to be where he is at. So there's a lot of leeway for them to work with these proto-hobbits. It'll be interesting to see how that all plays out and whether or not the Fallowhides also get introduced in an upcoming season of Rings of Power. All right, then we have the Númenorian storyline. So this storyline ended with the return of Elendil and Miriel to Númenor. Miriel is blind, and Tar Palantir, the king, has actually now passed away. He wasn't really functioning before, but now he's actually passed away. So we expect to see Númenor begin to accelerate on its decline towards their ultimate destruction. That is a spoiler, but it's one that pretty much everybody knows. Númenor is going to get completely wiped out in an act of divine justice. Now, I don't expect to see that happen in this season, but I do expect to see them start to decline. What we can tell from the trailers is Pharazôn is going to be seizing power, and it looks like he's going to be doing that through some conflict or deposing of Miriel, who should be the queen after Tar Palantir. Not a ton has been shown there, so I don't know how much of this season will actually focus in on Númenor. It seems like a lot of the focus is going to be on the elves this time around, but we will definitely see some of this progress as they decline towards their ultimate demise. And then we have the Orc storyline. This is the Adar storyline, and we don't know a ton about where this is going because Adar is in opposition to Sauron, and so it looks like there might be some kind of temporary alliance between Galadriel and the Orcs. Not really sure about that yet and where that's going to go. They are definitely introducing a troll called Damrod. He has his own song on the soundtrack, so that seems to be a major part of the Orc storyline, is bringing in this troll thing. So it'll be interesting to see. Trolls would be kind of a new culture for them to introduce and show us something about, and how they're going to take that whole thing with the way that they've already been taking Orcs in a very different direction than previous adaptations have. Lastly, it looks like there's going to be a new overlapping storyline, which will be Isildur and Arondir teaming up. This will probably be where Theo and the other Southlanders are involved, and it looks like they're going to be fighting Shelob or Shelob's children at least. So expect to see some spider fighting here. Ultimately, Isildur's got to make it back to Númenor. He's got some really important plot points to do there eventually, but I don't know if he's going to make it back this season. He may remain in Middle-earth with Arondir for the rest of this season. So that's basically what we know so far from the things that have been released. It still remains to be seen whether or not this will be good or not, whether or not we will like it. I would just recommend that you go into it with an open mind. Remember that this is season 2 of 5, so even at the end of this season, we will be less than halfway through the story arcs here. So try and give it a fair shake if you're interested in watching it. If you just aren't interested in seeing any new adaptations of Tolkien, then I would just say avoid it entirely. Just continue reading the books and enjoying that. And if you do want to know where some of these things are coming from, then of course I recommend that you pick up the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales to really get kind of a grasp on where Tolkien's larger legendarium is fitting into these stories. Okay, that's going to do it for us today. Rings of Power Season 2 will debut on August 29th. It's going to drop with 3 episodes and then 1 episode a week from there on out until it finishes. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. Farewell wherever ye fare. May your ears receive you at your journey's end.